name is Anton, and together with Irene, we run a company called Anton and Irene, and we're both designers.
I'm Irene, and together with Anton, I run a company called Anton and Irene.
Interconnection.
Yeah. The role of the designer actually never changes. So no matter what type of design you do, whether you're a graphic designer or interaction designer or even more specialized inside interaction, it doesn't matter, because as a designer, it's your job to communicate something for a client, because it's not an art form in that sense, and make it work. And that's, whatever your medium is inside of that is irrelevant, but the design process is always the same.
I think when we started our careers, it was 100%. And over time, I think it's going a little bit to a lower number. I think right now, maybe 70% of projects that we do, not necessarily for the web, but for the screen. Like, for example, I don't differentiate app or a website, or it's, at the end of the day, it's information that's on the screen that you can interact with. And right now we're trying to do a little bit more projects outside of the screen, some in physical space. We're doing a physical watch. We designed a uniform for Olympics. And then right now we have the One Shirt House project that we presented today. There's going to be an exhibition booth in London. So we try to now look at our design skills and things that we really, really like to do, and maybe take it out of the screen a little bit into a real world. There's quite some difference, actually. We had a lot of American clients, and we had a few European clients recently. Europeans are way more chilled. They don't need everything like now, like emailing, hey, ASAP, we need to stop, Americans are a little bit, everything has to be on schedule, everything has to be now, but what's really good is when it's done, it's done. With Europe, it's a little bit more chilled, and sometimes it actually might take a little bit more time to do something, and we're used to work really, really fast. But I think there is this sense of urgency between when the Europeans are a little bit more relaxed, you know, if it's going to take this long, they don't argue with you. Where in the US, people would try to push you to get things as fast as possible and get it released and jump to a next project immediately.
Also, I think there's no such thing as European design, actually, because each country has its own visual history and visual basically way of designing. So if you think about design in Holland, it's very different from design in Spain. And it makes sense because, you know, if you even go back in time, like, you know, even the way design started or how art was formed, for example, in Spain had a lot to do with the Catholic Church, and in Holland it didn't. So there is no such thing as European design. And usually you can tell where design has originated from. And I actually think it's a bit of a pity that in graphic design it's still very clear. Like, I know pretty much right away if it's a Swiss designer or if it's some random people from other countries trying to do Swiss design, you know, because people try to copy other countries' style even though they are not from that country quite a bit. But in web, it all pretty much looks the same now. Because everybody, you know, is connected now, and unfortunately, which I think is a very big pity in our field, it all looks the same, so it's all kind of boring, and there's not a whole lot of innovation, because we're all looking at each other, copying each other, and there's no actual sense of understanding historically where design is originating from. We're just copying stuff that we're seeing on the screen, and I think that's really sad, and we try to not do that as a rule, but you really, in that sense, it's not even that hard to stand out online because everything is so homogenized that if you do something even slightly differently, everyone's looking like, oh, someone's doing something totally different. Oh my God, it's not just a white box and a quote and a product and a quote and a product, and you know, it's all yeah, it's all the same. So when I think of design as a bigger movement, you know, that it started with advertising in the 30s, basically. I don't think of it as a digital design little microscope, because that's what, 15 years, 20 if you really want to stretch it. It's not enough to really talk about, you know, what it does as a whole.
I think it depends on the projects. Sometimes you can actually try and experiment a lot. It depends, I think, on the task, on the client,
depends on the audience.
Or
yeah.
If you're doing it, it's a personal project and you can actually risk more. Your timeline, if you have a week to do a project or you have 3 months to do a project. So it's case by case. There were projects where we experimented a lot. We experimented, 80% of it was experimentation and 20% was kind of routine work. And we've done jobs where it was 90% routine work and maybe 10 or 5% experimentation. It really, really depends on who you're doing it for and timing.
For example, just to give a concrete example, when we designed the website for the Met Museum, which is the second biggest museum in the world, there was no space for experimentation because they made it very clear to us that because we have to consider that any person anywhere in the world at any time from any screen of any age should be able to get the thing that they're looking for, we had to design it in the most obvious, simplest, sort of non-experimentational way. So there was no space for experimentation at all. Whereas a project we recently completed for Space 10 and IKEA, which is a survey on the future of communal living, they were actually very open to us being experimental and trying new ways of interacting, and they didn't tie us down because basically they said, you know, if we're talking about the future, we should assume that you know, this level of experimentation has already been understood, right? Because if you think about, I always use my mom as an example. You know, when we started designing for the web, right, like in the late 90s, and we were maybe coding a little bit as well, very few people were online. There were like 10 people online, and there were like 3 websites, you know? So if you had a website that made no sense and was really hard to figure out, it didn't matter because we would spend the time trying to figure it out and trying to understand it. But now everyone is on the internet. My mom is on the internet, and there's a bazillion websites. And they're not going to spend the time trying to figure out this thing when there's another website where it's very easy, right? So in that sense, it's lost its artistry because when we were younger, it wasn't necessarily measured. We didn't really know how sites were performing. And now you can measure every single click and every single way that people interact with it. So a lot of clients are actually kind of afraid to experiment because for some clients, if the drop-off rate is 2%, that could mean millions of dollars lost. So they don't want to experiment. That's not in their interest, right? But other clients don't care about that. So you always have to understand, as a designer, what is the goal of the client, and then how can I achieve that and support that? Not what is our personal agenda, and then just do that regardless of the client. That doesn't work. I have no opinions about that, actually. You?
It will be there.
Or not.
Or not. I mean, it's hard to say. In one way, things change really, really fast. There was a Tesla car in space a few days ago, and on the other hand, things are still slow because at the end of the day, we're still humans interacting with each other. There are still clients who pay money and other people who execute work. Same way it was done even 50 years ago or 60 years ago. Just the tools changed a little bit. The medium changed a little bit. Now, what used to be a poster came on a screen, and now it's a wearable, and in the future it's going to be AI. But at the end of the day, as a designer, you would always have to distill a certain amount of information and think about how to present it to end user in the best way. Whether it's going to be a voice, whether it's going to be a laser signal sent to your brain with certain information, we're all going to be, at the end of the day, thinking about how do we deliver information to a user in the best way and in the most clear way, and maybe sometimes in the most fun and entertaining way.
And also some design decisions like that people don't even think about anymore, like a traffic light. That was a very deliberate design decision, right? Red means stop and green means go and orange means slow down. And that hasn't changed. So there are things in our culture, design-wise, that we will never get away from, you know? And it doesn't really matter if it's going to be AI or whatever. Like, there are still things that we need to all collectively agree on as humans, that we all, you know, like language, we all think that that's a chair and it's called a chair. No one's going to come 100 years from now and say that's not a chair, it's going to be called something else. So the collectiveness of us as people and how we experience the world is what's interesting about design. And I don't think, talking about the future, a lot of people want to talk about, you know, whatever, artificial intelligence, and that's like kind of irrelevant, you know, because it's still about what are we communicating at the core and what do we all collectively agree on.
Okay, perfect. So I think we're fine.
Yes.
Yes? Okay.
Nice.
Awesome.